everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog, our YouTube channel, and our Facebook group, and our great sponsors, Abitativa Casa, Italy Rooting, and Phil Italy. And my guest today is author and influencer, Karen Tintori. So welcome, Karen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Bob. It's a pleasure.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. It's great to have somebody with your background and writing books and some great stories. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to read them yet, but I will. I promise I will. So just, before we talk about your books and things, where's your family from originally, and when did they arrive in the United States?
I have only one grandparent. All of my ancestors are Italian. I have only one grandparent who was born in the United States, my dad's mother, and she was the daughter of a coal miner. My grandfather, Tintori, and my grandmother's family came from Modena province. They were from two small towns there in the Apennines, Fanano and Sestola. And so that's my mountainside of my family. And my mom's family came from Sicily. My grandfather came from Mazzara del Vallo, which is where we have our Italian citizenship now. Mazzara del Vallo is about the middle of Sicily on the west coast. It's the biggest fishing port in Sicily. And he grew up there. And my grandmother was born in Partinico. And then that family was in Corleone, Partinico, Palermo before coming over. My Sicilian grandfather came over a little before my grandmother, early 19-teens. My grandmother's family came over in 1914 as a family. My great-grandfather and two of my grandmother's brothers had come to Detroit earlier. My grandmother always said they worked on the railroad. Well, later I realized they were laying tracks for the trolley cars. And the northern side came over in the early 1900s to mine coal in Illinois. After many of them died there in cave-ins, et cetera, mine accidents. And eventually, when Henry Ford was offering $5 a day, that brought them to Detroit. So I was born in East Lansing. No, I was born in Lansing. My dad was up at school in East Lansing, and he graduated in June. My mom didn't want to change gynecologists with 3 months to go, so I was born in MSU country, and then when I was 6 weeks old, been in Detroit the rest of my life.
Oh, that's cool. So I didn't realize that. Did a lot of Italians go work for Ford?
Yeah. Yes. There are two distinct Detroit Italian communities. There's one that moved up the corridor. Well, we have Woodward Avenue is kind of like the divider between East and West. The West Siders usually didn't go east of Woodward and vice versa. And so in the Livonia, Michigan area, and on the west side, there is a big Italian community. They have a cultural center. And then on the east side, and going more northeast, is a big Italian community. A lot of Southern Italians in this area from Southern Italy and Sicily.
Yeah, and I think you're probably the first person from Detroit with Italian ancestry that I've interviewed. So I don't know that much about the Italian communities in Detroit. Like I tell people all the time, snobs from New York think the Italians just settled in New York and that was the end of it.
I know a lot of us, Midwesterners think that, that everything ends in New York and you don't even know what's going on here. And there are so many, especially with writers and with the Calandra Institute in New York. And there's so many programs and things that that's what I miss not living near the city, is that I can just pop in and do some of those things. So I feel like a deprived Detroit Italian.
So did you live in New York?
No, I just visited a lot with, meeting with publishers, going to conferences. My brother lives in Brooklyn, or lived in Brooklyn for a while. He teaches there. So he teaches in the city.
Oh, yeah. My dad was a photographer for the Daily News for many years. And he did Brooklyn for about, 18 years. And then he did Queens for about 18 years. And Brooklyn's none of the Italian communities, with the exception of Arthur Avenue, are the same as they used to be in the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. So what about Detroit's Italian communities? Are they still thriving as Italian-American communities?
Well, we have a vibrant Detroit community. In fact, in a couple of weeks,
Lost you.
The Livonia, Detroit community is having Franoy is having a blind date with a book, November 22nd, where they're going to be authors and Italian merchants and all things Italian for a little fundraiser there. Italian Cultural Center that is in Clinton Township is very vibrant. I can't even tell you how many groups there are from the different sections in Italy that are still very active, have monthly activities. Two newspapers, one from the Italian American Cultural Center and another one, the Italian American. So it's we have a big festival for 3 days every July. It's nothing like the feast of San Gennaro in New York, but we try.
Well, San Gennaro though isn't what it used to be.
Oh, we were there 35 years ago when Little Italy was bigger.
Well, and part of the problem is back then, all the concessions, everything was pretty much run by Italians. Now, not so much. And when I was a kid growing up in Corona, Queens, we used to have a feast right outside my grandmother's doorstep. Zeppelas were 3 for a quarter back then.
Ha 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 ha.
Not anymore. We sell them. I think we sell them 7 for $10 now, or something like that, at our festival. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I want to ask you about. Yeah, go ahead.
No, we invented Detroit pizza here.
Yes. Everybody has pizza, but we know where the real pizza comes from. My wife, when we go to Naples, my wife, she doesn't like the pizza in Naples. She said it's not the same. I said, well, of course not, because it's Neapolitan pizza. But we did find the last trip. We did find some place that she liked, so that was a plus. That was a good plus. So I want to ask you about some of the books, but specifically, I really want to ask you about the Cherry Mine Disaster book, because that to me is fascinating, and I never heard of the Cherry Mine Disaster. So
that just got chills up my head, because this is actually, it started out as a genealogy search. My grandpa Tintori died before I was born. My mom thought she was pregnant with me back then. The women peed in a cup and if they injected it in a rabbit, if the rabbit died, they were pregnant. She hadn't killed the rabbit yet. But he was in the hospital and I was the first grandchild. My dad was an only child. And so she told him she was pregnant. He said, I won't live to see the baby. And he died the next day. So that's my little moment in time with my grandpa Tintori. So when I started doing genealogy, I started growing up. My grandmother in Detroit, we lived downstairs. She lived upstairs. There were 2 full flats, 2 full homes. And so I can picture myself standing on the landing between the 2, and she's on the stairs, and she would say to me, your grandfather survived the Cherry Mine disaster. Like, your grandfather walked on water. So this was a refrain. I thought, okay, so I didn't speak Italian or read Italian at the time. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? Well, I'll write to the mayor of Cherry, Illinois. I'll write to the United Mine Workers. I'll write to Bonanno. I was trying to piece together who Giovanni Tintori was and what this mine disaster was all about. Like pieces of a puzzle out of order, information would come in. People who knew about it would send me information. And I actually was sitting in the movie theater Titanic, and I'd been writing since I was 12. I knew I was going to write. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I'd already had some books come out by major New York publishers. And my hesitancy to do anything with Cherry is because Jack Rooney, whose grandfather also survived the Cherry Mine disaster, grew up in Cherry, and he's Mr. Cherry Mine Disaster. He's still collecting information, finding new information, publishing new information online about it. And I was deferring to Jack because he said to me one day he was going to write a book, sitting in Titanic. And he said to myself, you're sitting on Titanic in a coal mine. Write the darn book. So I asked Jack, do you care if I write it? And he gave me his blessing. And so that was it. But even in Illinois, Cherry is like about 80 miles south of Chicago. Even in Illinois, people don't know about the Cherry Mine disaster. And not only, okay, so it was the worst mine fire in our country's history. It was the second worst disaster for loss of life of Italian American immigrants. But it has all kind of historical significance in that it was the settlement of it with the mine company was the first application of workers' comp in this country. The workers' comp law had been passed in Great Britain a few years before, and the lawyers who were working on settling this looked to that as a means to settle with the widows and with the survivors. And then it became Illinois law, and then it became US law. That mine disaster on a Saturday morning, this mine was supposed to be an inexhaustible supply of coal. They found it, the northernmost coal vein in Illinois. And unlike other mines where they only work part of the year, this would be worked year round. And the call went out to European countries, the American miners and European miners, and most of them that came over were from Italy, northern Italy. A lot of Italians came over to mine, Pennsylvania and down south. There's a lot of that kind of mining history. But in any event, it was declared fireproof, like the Titanic, unsinkable. And it was the first mine with electricity throughout. So the first vein you can't mine, it's too thin. But then there was a middle vein and then a bottom vein. And men would drop down on an elevator cage. They would walk across about half a mile or so, and then a wooden staircase took them down to the third vein. They had mules at that time. Mules were hooked up to the carts that they filled with coal, and then they bring them to the elevator shaft and they'd go up. Well, there was a short down in the bottom of the mine where they kept the mules. Water shorted out the electricity. New wire was ordered. It hadn't come. They were 3 weeks. They were waiting on it. And the morning of the fire was a Saturday morning. 81 men and boys, and there were young boys. It changed child labor laws too, dropped down into the mine. And a little while later, lunchtime, some left, but there was a hay cart sent down every day to feed the mules. Same time the hay cart was supposed to go down, coal was supposed to come up. So they had gone back when the electricity went out. There are timbers on the roof of a mine because shale is above the coal and because of cave-ins. So the roofs are all timbered. And they went back to the old system of putting a kerosene torch to light the paths. So the theory is that kerosene, when hay came down, the kids pushed it under a kerosene torch. You can take a fire blaster to cut hay. It's not going to catch on fire. But they think that some of the kerosene dripped into the hay bale and that was an accelerant. It took 45 minutes before the call to go out for the mine to be cleared. By that time, there was one sign in English as to how to get out. It was dark. The mules were screaming. The timbers caught fire. And then it was an unbelievable disaster. And it was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. They called the Chicago Fire Department to come in. Now, they came in with their tanks pouring water into the mine, but all it was doing was creating a steam bath, a boiling pot, because the water was hitting the floor and not touching the ceilings where the fire was. So the fact that this happened about the exact same time, a couple years difference as the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And of the 251 men and boys who died in that disaster, most of them were Italian immigrants. Italians don't know about it. People in Illinois don't know about it. And there is a group from Modena that is putting together they have a proposal right now trying to get funding for a 4-part documentary on the Cherry Mine disaster and the another one that happened in New Mexico. And so we'll see if that comes to fruition. They're planning to come here to interview descendants and experts and go to the sites and then talk about the labor applications, and the settlements of those disasters.
Well, there's so many of these things that we don't know about. And, that's one of the reasons why I do this, is because the younger generations need to understand that wasn't all peaches and cream for the Italians when they came here. It was very, very rough life over there.
Right.
And in some cases, even rougher when they got here.
When I wondered, I've been to both of my grandfather's houses in Italy and not inside either one of them. They were both black, but to be in that scenery, in that environment, in that culture, and to realize that they left. There were no telephones at the time. You say goodbye to your mother, you say goodbye forever, you say goodbye to your parents. And to leave that beauty, what I say in Trapped is that they traded sunshine for a future. because they went into the mine in the morning when it was dark, and they came out at night when it was dark. And constant fear of death. And that's how they dug out the coal. That mine disaster, there was a miracle. They finally sealed the mine to prevent the fire. Thought they could smother the fire by sealing the mine. And after 8 days, they opened the mine looking for bodies. And there were 21 men, most of them Italians, who had kept going farther back in the mine to escape the black damp, the poisonous gases. They wrote their families goodbye notes, put them in their pocket, prayed, lay down to die. In the middle of the night, one of the guys said, I have an idea. Why don't we try to dig some of the coal from the walls and blockade ourselves, like blockade this tunnel? And they did. And the Italians went looking, they found one shovel and one pickaxe, and they did it. And 21 days later, when they were out of water and out of food and out of light, but their lights and their helmets only lasted 3 days. And then they were eating their belts and the leather from their caps, trying to stay alive. They walked out alive to everybody's, There is a young filmmaker, script writer, who has written, I think he got more heart in his screenplay of this story than even I did in the book. So there is a screenplay written and waiting for somebody to pick it up, and it would make a great miniseries, a great movie. It's just an unbelievable story.
That's interesting because I don't know if you heard of Michael Cavieri. He's done a couple of documentaries now. He did one on returning back to his hometown, Limina, in Sicily, but he's done two. The second one now is I guess it's in post-production, but he did documentaries on the coal miners or the sulfur miners in Sicily. He went and interviewed the men who are now in their 70s and 80s who were working in the sulfur mines as 7 and 8-year-old boys. And again, an incredible story. And you don't think that they would still have people little boys working in sulfur mines in the 1960s, 1970s, but they were.
And those sulfur mines, I know what have gone near baths in Italy and what that little bit of sulfur smells like. But to think of I don't know which is worse, the carbon coal or the sulfur mines. It's just a hideous way to make a living.
Yeah, and when he was doing some of the grandchildren of the men who worked in the mines or boys who worked in the mines, they didn't even realize, they didn't know the stories.
Wow.
So it's quite fascinating. And he's doing another one now because he's good at that kind of stuff. And
okay, well, I'm gonna have to check out that sulfur mine documentary.
Yeah, it's Michael Cavieri is his name, and check him out. He's a good guy, and it's funny because I was trying to get in touch with him for a long time, and he didn't answer. And then I found out that he was born in Whitestone, New York, same town I was born in. So hey, we're both from Whitestone. I think, oh, okay, Whitestone, and then we made a connection there. But he's very, very passionate about all of these stories, and we're working on something too. It's going to tell the story of what happened with the first Italians that came over and were led to believe that they were going to go to South America, and then they dumped them in New York, and then what went on from there. Again, something people don't realize.
No, people, when I first started genealogy, there were online listservs, and when it came out and people were talking about the internment camps that they had, they're screaming, my grandparents, my parents, no, this is a lie, that never happened to Italian Americans. And I thought, oh God, if they think it was, Lisa Scavallini had written about this, about one of her characters in her legal series was trying to get some reparations for the parents or some justice about this, and they were screaming, this is a lie. I thought, what are they going to do in my book Unto the Daughters about my great aunt being killed in Detroit by her older brothers? And then I had some, that never happened, different vignettes, like my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother, they had 9 kids, and she'd cook for everybody, but she had to eat out of the same plate as my great-grandfather, and he would salt the whole plate, even though she didn't want salt. So they're screaming at me that I'm a liar. Their grandmother never had to eat off their grandfather's plate. We don't like to, and even though it was history that wounded us, we don't like to admit it.
Well, and I have the proof of the alien, the Enemy Aliens Act, because I have my grandparents' cards with their picture on it. They were in their 60s. And grandfathers, they both came around 1915, 1914, 1950, like 15, like you. And they had to register for the draft for both wars. So after the Enemy Alien Act, at 60 years old, they still had to register for the draft. And my uncle, who was left behind by my mother's parents when they came, even though he had 4 brothers who served in World War II, he had to wait in Canada for 5 years to come into America.
Wow.
So it didn't matter. But that was the other book that when I wanted to ask you about that story about was it your grandmother, great grandmother?
My great aunt, my grandmother's.
Oh, your great aunt.
Yeah, I thought I knew that family inside and out. There were 3 brothers, 3 sisters, and 3 brothers. Actually, there were 4 sisters. And when I was doing Trapped and learning Italian and writing to Italy for records, my mother said, "You don't have to do that with our side of the family. Grandma's got all the papers." I never caught on for years that they were putting me off. After my grandpa died, my mom had 2 brothers, one who died, third one who died in stillborn. But there were 2 surviving brothers and 3 of the girls. And so every Sunday night, my grandmother would move to another daughter's house to spend the week. She said, "My life is shit. I'm a gypsy." But when she couldn't take care of herself and couldn't be she was like 91, 92. So it would be, "Yeah, you can come over on Tuesday and see the papers." And then the night before, "We forgot, Grandma has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. You can't come." And dummy me never realized they were hiding something. Finally, she's at Aunt Grace's, and I pull up the next morning. Nobody cancels with me. I pull up. She has a house on the side street. The kitchen windows are open. I know they're home. I walk in, and my aunt literally told me the 80-year-old family secret behind her mother's back. I go around the kitchen table to kiss my grandmother, and my aunt goes to the front corner of the kitchen table and opens a musty shoebox and pulls out the family passport. I took a photo. We didn't even have Kinko's or anything like that. It was American Speedy Printer. I went and made a copy of it. Family passport was my great grandfather and the King of Italy on it, and the inside was my great grandmother and a list of all the kids. One entry was completely scribbled out, blackened out. And Aunt Grace goes, and my grandmother, meanwhile, is sputtering in Sicilian. "Who's she going to show? Who's she going to tell? People could get hurt." And Gracie goes, "That's the one they got rid of. Did your mother ever tell you?" And what? And she goes, closes it, puts it back in the box and says, "Never mind," and goes to the kitchen sink and starts wiping the. I go, "You can't do that to me." So finally she told me how she had found out. And yeah, the night they killed Francesca, they burned her clothing, they destroyed her pictures, they scratched her out of the family passport, and she was never spoken of again. And my mother told me, when I called my mother, when I got home that day, I said, "Is what Aunt Grace told me true?" And she growls into the phone, "Your father went to his grave and he never knew that blankety blank blank. Karen Ann, forget it." She knew I was going to write about it, right? Eventually, she came around, she'd call me up and say, "I got another thing for you to add to your story," like little vignettes from growing up. But no, the next generation heard their mothers whispering about Francesca. I said to my mother, did anybody call the police?" She go, "What police? What, are you going to call the police?" And they were afraid then their brothers were going to have retribution on them. And what was her crime? This was Detroit I couldn't find her on the 1920 census. So she was murdered probably about the time she was 16. She eloped with the young barber her own age, who she was in love with, rather than marrying the guy 20 years older that her dad promised her to.
Wow.
To get his kids a leg up in a better gang, because that guy on the early mafia in Detroit, a gang from Corleone, a gang from Partenico, a gang from here, a gang from there. It was prohibition. So what were they doing? Stealing tires, stealing cars, running prostitutes, and running rum. And so that was to move up to a better gang. And so we have a beautiful park off downtown Detroit, Belle Isle. And they took her to Belle Isle and they killed her and threw her in, and that was that. And
So it was like I was basically an honor
It
killing.
was an honor killing.
Now, what about did they kill the guy?
I asked
The
my
husband?
mother, I said, what happened to the barber? She said he hightailed it out of town because he knew he was next.
He was next. Wow.
And and omerta, and a child, it was like, you don't air your dirty laundry, you don't share family secrets. And so I wrote this book as a novel three entire times. And each time the protagonist was a different age. At one point, one of my cousins who went to acting school said, you need to make your protagonist closer in age, a teenager, closer in age to Francesca, so that she could think like, well, it could have happened to me, if I had been born back then. Eventually, my trapped editor has said to me, you need to give yourself permission to reimagine Francesca's life and write this as narrative nonfiction, like In Cold Blood was written and like I had written Trapped. So you use your journalist head and your novelist heart to put the story together. And on the day of when I wrote it as a novel, my inciting incident was always like snooping around at grandma's and you find a wedding picture when you've always been told that the sepia painted picture was a picture of my grandparents in peasant clothes. And that was their wedding picture. We all grew up, that was grandma and grandpa's wedding picture. So my idea was that there was a secret wedding picture in a gown and a veil and a bouquet and a boutonniere. And there were 2 extra people in the picture. And I know this guy who looks like Uncle Louis, but who's this girl who looks like me? So that was my inciting incident for it. And I've had some psychic experiences in my life. And I kept waiting, like, Frances, do you want me to write this book? And, come to me, let me know, give me a hint. My grandmother, at that time, it's not the custom here in Detroit anymore. You used to be, when you died, you laid out at the funeral home for 3 days and people came and visited. And now it's like, see ya for 5 minutes at mass, and then we're closing the casket. And
I tell my wife I want the 3-day.
That's not the deal here anymore. But anyway, my cousin who was the acting student, says to me at the cemetery, did you see the picture? When he said that, I knew it had to be Francesca. So I said, where is it? He goes, my mom has it. My grandmother had hidden it her whole life. And then I realized that my grandmother got married a year before Francesca, this elopement. So yeah, my grandmother had hidden this picture, and it was a wedding picture. It's the cover of the book. It was the real wedding picture. And there were 2 extra people in the picture, and one of them was Francesca.
Wow, that's
so something. I'm going like, thank you. You wanted me to tell your story, because why would I have gotten that crazy idea?
I'll tell you something. I mean, I learned this, let's see, maybe a month or 2 ago. I interviewed somebody who was 90 years old in Corona, where the family was from. She's the same age as my cousin, who I hadn't talked to in, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. So I called my cousin and we were talking and stuff. And then he said to me, he says, do you know the story about our great grandmother? I said, no. I said, the woman in the picture with Uncle John. And he said, yeah. I said, no, I don't know any story about her. So he said, when he was about 16 or something, he said, because he understood Italian because he grew up with my grandparents. And his mother is the oldest sister, the oldest daughter in the family. And he said, whenever I would walk in the room, they would stop talking. Same thing, right? Similar to yours. And he said, I wondered for years and years and years, they would just stop talking. So he said, he was in the Korean War. He said, I came back from the war. I was playing cards with grandma and I asked her, why did you always stop talking when I came in the room? And she was like, oh, no. So he said, come on, grandma, you got to tell me. You have to tell me. So what happened was, I don't remember if it was I think it was my great-grandmother's sister. I believe it was my great-grandmother's sister. She got pregnant by some guy, and my great-grandmother said to her, well, you know what you have to do. You have to get married. And she said, he won't marry me. So she said, well, then you have to do the other thing. So she said, oh, I can't do that. So apparently my great-grandmother took this guy out.
Wow.
And I don't know how. My wife says, how'd she do it? I said,
shotgun with no wedding.
I said, I don't know how she did it. I said, maybe she was the woman in town who made the potions or something like that.
That's great. That's a great story.
But I heard a couple. I mean, I heard another story that I interviewed somebody, and this was in Italy too. And the priest got somebody pregnant, and the two brothers just they killed the priest, and they wound up. That's how they wound up in America. They killed the priest and came to America because he got the sister pregnant. And I'm sure there's tons of stories like that
Well,
because back then,
the awful thing about this is that, I mean, by that time I had learned Italian because I got a book. How could this happen in my family? And then I spent 12 years researching her life. I couldn't ask my grandmother. My grandmother was too upset for me to upset her. Wasn't above saying to my mother, ask grandma this. But I talked to some of my mother's first cousins, and then I everybody had a different story about what happened. There was a common thread. I followed the common thread to the story, and then when my mother was dying, one of her uncles, because my great grandmother and my grandmother were pregnant at the same time, so my mother and her uncles were similar age. So
uh-huh.
one of them came to town to say goodbye with his daughter, and she said to me, "If there's nobody in the kitchen, if there are no strangers in the kitchen, meaning my husband or my sister's husband, my dad will tell you what happened." And so he asked me, "Do you have the picture?" I showed him the picture. He started crying, and he told me what I had deduced. And but in Sicily, at the time, even back in 1913, 1920, if a young woman was in love and she eloped, she came back, she wasn't a virgin anymore. She won. That was it. It was like, then kill the guy, then kill her. That was the way that it was called fuita. That was the way that you won. But Francesca didn't win. And it was like, I had to give her back her name. I had to give her back her place. And October 8th was just the anniversary of her birth. And that's the book of my heart.
Yeah, that's some story. And yeah, and, it's shocking, really, when you think about it. And it's interesting that you say in Sicily she would have won, but here they did this revenge killing thing, or honor killing, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's really something. I don't consider myself an author, but I did write about my family, and starting with uh, what I knew from my two families growing up as an Italian American, some of the stories of people I had interviewed when I did the book, and then also I went into my noble families because those people were just out of control. But what advice for somebody who wants whether they want to write, a fiction book about, historical fiction about their family, or they just want to capture the details, stories like this. What advice would you give to somebody starting out or thinking about it?
Grab hold of your oldest living ancestors and ask them questions about what they know about the family history. And if you ask a question one way and don't get an answer, circle back, figure out a different way to ask the question another time. My grandmother was very resistant to be taped, and finally one Christmas Eve, she did answer questions about growing up. Nothing about Francesca, but I did get a lot of information, genealogy research, books, the library. There's tons of information about the towns where your family came from, what life was like there. But the people, you have to talk to the people, ask them their favorite memory, what their house looked like, if there were any secrets, if there were things that weren't talked about, what lessons their family taught them, what it means to them, or what it meant to their family to be Italian American.
Yeah, and I interviewed some people about that. I did a little thing where I had home movies of 7 Italian American families, and then I asked them, some questions, and they talked about it over the movies and things like that. I wish I had done that. I wish I had thought about this years ago when some of my uncles were still alive, and even my grandmother when I was small. But one thing that we do have is my cousin was smart enough because they all grew up in Bari. They all grew up in Torito. He was smart enough to interview my uncle in Barres before he passed away. And I had never known about this. And then one of his sister tipped me off. And I called him and I said, Joey, you got to translate this, man. I said, this is the family history. And he said, I wanted to do it a few times, but it just made me too melancholy and I couldn't do it. And I said, you got to do it. You have to do this. And it was so great because he talks about life, you know, how he met my aunt through the war years, what he did growing up and stuff like that. He was in love with my aunt, but her family was a little bit above our family, and they didn't want him to get married.
Uh-huh.
They wouldn't let him get married. And then he went away. He went into the army, and when he came back, they allowed him to marry her. But he was the uncle who was left behind. And then I also interviewed my cousin who was she was born, I think, in about 1932 or so. And I asked her what it was like growing up in Italy at the time and through the war and all of that. And, she said, we had and I've seen a house, same thing. I didn't get to go inside, but she said we had 2 rooms. There was the one room which was the kitchen, the living room, the kids' bedrooms, and everything else. And then my parents' room, which was for my parents and the newest baby. And she said, and there was always a baby.
Well, I have 3 more stories that I mean, 2 of them I don't know if I'll be able to write, but on my Modenese side, 2 of my ancestors, the line is Parrochetti. Along the way, we've lost R's and T's and, different. Tintori used to be 2 R's and an E at the end, or 2 R's and an I. So anyway, the 2 Parrochetti brothers were famed architects from Varese, which is near Milan. And they were asked to come down and design a bridge that connected Tuscany with Emilia-Romagna for the first time. It's the Ponte di Olina. And I've walked that bridge several times. It was the crest in the middle. I think it's 1535 is when that bridge was built. And so there are a lot of Parrochetti descendants in that area. These 2 gentlemen designed churches and other bridges. I'm still trying to find information about them. I'd love to write about what it was like to be in the 1500s and knighted by the Duke of Milan. They, with family crest, and there's this palazzo, and who knows where the palazzo is or if anybody still lives in it. So that's one story I would like to explore. The other is when I went to one of my trips to Fanano. Because of Trapped, I had become acquainted with, made friends with Walter Bellizzi, a journalist for Il Resto del Carlino in Italy. And he said, I'm going to do some research on your grandfather. I said, oh, no, I did all the research. And then he said, let me dig. He says, your grandfather was born in a famous house. I went to the house. The house, it was from my grandfather's mother's side of the family, the Galettis. And his cousin was Felice Padrone, Felix Pedro in the States. Felice Padrone left Italy to go be a coal miner like his brothers. He hated it. Then the story goes he went out west to be a cowboy and he hated it. And then the gold rush happened. And Felix Pedro and another man struck gold in what became Fairbanks, Illinois. They co-founded Fairbanks. So I'm going to Alaska next summer. And I've got all kind of books about the gold rush in Fairbanks. And he had a very colorful life. Not sure how he went back to Italy in 1906 to propose to the gal he loved back there, but he was in love with her. He went and asked her to marry him after he struck it rich, and she said no. And she had second thoughts, and she wrote a letter saying, I will, and her brothers destroyed the letter. So he married the Irish dance hall girl in Fairbanks, and that led to no good end.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Yeah, that's another one I want to do.
So think about this. My 8th and 9th great grandfathers were the princes of Avellino.
That's very cool.
And they owned, much of current day Campania.
Wow.
They were the princes of Avellino, the dukes of Atrapalda, the count of this place, the marquis of the other place. And so like you were saying before, I envision like, gee, boy, would I like to drop in on that scene one day? Just hover over that. But when we went to Avellino, we went with Letizia Sinisi, she does Italy rooting, and they brought us to it's now the town hall, of course, but it was the Prince's Palazzo way back when, and they treated me like I was the prince. I mean, it was amazing. They had the horns blowing and people dressed from the Renaissance, and here I am, this American. I'm standing there like this doofus American, But what was amazing about it is I asked, I said, why, and they said, we don't forget. We don't forget.
The advice I would give to anybody wanting to know, get back to Italy and go to your
Uh-huh.
family ancestral
Uh-huh.
towns, even if you have no relatives there. I mean, you need to experience that, but if you have relatives there, it's like they can't do enough for you. That's what just kills me is that the bond. It's
Yeah.
we're on two different continents and you don't get to see each other very much. And at least there's Zoom and there's Facebook, and there are ways to see what's going on in each other's lives now.
Yeah. And we went to Modena, which was a great place. We wound up going there because um, we were going to go someplace else. And then my daughter loves cars and the Ferrari Museum is in Modena. So we went there. But what was great about Modena was there's no tourists, very few
Yeah.
tourists. And the same thing with Ferrara. We went to Ferrara because
Yes.
Isabella d'Este is one of my grandmothers. And so I said, I got to go see this place.
Very
And
cool.
what's really neat is the Estense Castle is really nice to be at and to go up and overlook the city and all of that kind of stuff. And the same thing, there's no tourists there, and so to your point, even if you don't know what town you're from, you got to go to these smaller places where there's no tourists.
This is what my husband and I do. I mean, in the beginning we did the, Venice, Rome, Florence, the requisite things that you're supposed to do. We will book ourselves or plant ourselves. A couple of years ago, we went to Genoa. We were based in Genoa. We could see the train station from our apartment window. And every day, we either explored part of Genoa, or the night before we'd gone and checked the train schedule, and we took the train. It was like 2.5 hours was the most. We would take the train to town 2.5 hours away. Sometimes in Lucca, because the book that I'm trying to find an agent for now is mostly set in Lucca. In Lucca, we had booked a specific time going back. We couldn't get off the walls. We nearly missed the train by 2 minutes. But anyway, no, and so we would just go and explore that town, try to follow our crumbs back to the train station without the tourists, with the locals, and get the flavor of it, and just immerse yourself in these small towns.
Yeah, and that's what we did this last time. We kind of did it backwards. We did all the South and Calabria and some of the small places in Sicily. And then the next time we went to my mother's hometown, to Rito. So my father comes from his mother comes from these noble families, and my mother were poor farmers. And they met in Corona, Queens. So go figure, right?
Love it. Love it.
So
Well,
it's pretty neat.
when you mentioned that your ancestors had to join the draft, Grandpa Tintori served in World War I. That is how he became a U.S. citizen. And so soon after he was a coal miner and got married to my grandmother, then he was off in France, served in France. My dad ended up getting a medical discharge, but when we were kids, he kept saying to us, I was in a unit. I don't know what they were going to do with us, but I was in a special trained unit, and every guy in the unit knew we were being trained, knew a different language, and I knew Italian. Once I really learned Italian, I'm going, you didn't know Italian? I mean, he spoke a dialect from
Dialect, yeah.
Modena, between my mother speaking Sicilian to her sisters and her mother, and my dad speaking to his grandmother. They didn't have 5 words together, like in Modenese dialect. That dialect, nonna is no nunun, nono is nunun instead of nono. And so it was only on a trip to Italy when we went up into the Apennine, into the mountains where the Allies had a base, and the Germans, where we defeated the Germans there, that I realized, oh my God, my dad, that was the dialect he knew. That's what
they
they were
needed.
probably going to say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there was a fire, and my grandfather and my father's military records were in the place that got burned down. So I can't find any of that. That's a stumbling block.
Did you know that there were 7 Italians? I think it was 7 in Custer's 7th Cavalry at the Little Bighorn.
No.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. There was one survivor, John Martin. His real name was Giovanni Martini. He was left in the wheel in Italy. He got to America. He was in the army. He eventually wound up in New York City, and he did, I want to say he did the tile work in the subways at some point.
Interesting.
But yeah, he was the bugler. And he survived because they sent him to go bring a message to, one of the other captains, generals, current, whatever. And that's how he wound up surviving. Otherwise, he would have been killed at the Little Bighorn, too.
You know how my grandfather survived the Cherry Mine disaster? Was the book, I think the book was nearly written. And my mother says to me one day on the phone, Grandpa Tintori survived the Cherry. I go like, no, now you're going to tell me? My dad was dead. My dad was dead by this time. My grandmother was dead by the time I was researching this. She said, he had a hangover and he didn't go to work that day.
Wow.
His 18-year-old first cousin died in the disaster, and he was already the head of the household because his father had died in a cave-in in a different mine. Once I finally got my grandpa's ship records, the book was out several years, and I looked at it, and my grandfather came over about this time in October. Cherry Mine disaster was November 9th. And I'm like, by the time you get processed through Ellis Island and you get yourself to Ladd, Illinois, and then the 3 miles over to Cherry, what was he there? A week, maybe? And didn't speak a lick of English. And there you go.
Well, it's like I had a friend, 9/11. He worked in the Trade Center. He got back from vacation on Monday, and his computer wasn't working. And the computer guy, he worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, and they all got killed. And his computer wasn't working on Monday. The guy told him, "Take your time coming in tomorrow. We'll work on your computer." He got off the subway later than he usually would, and saw the first building on fire. Turned around and went home. It's the same thing. I mean, it's just fate, luck, or divine. Who knows what it is, right?
Right.
So before we go, where can people find you? Where can they find the books?
The books are on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. And if you can't find one, they can contact me directly through my website, which is KarenTintori.com. www.KarenTintori.com. Right. And
thanks.
I love doing book clubs. If you have a book club and you want to get books and have me do a Zoom meeting with your book club, or if you're in the Detroit area, contact me. Writing is a very solitary job. And you can sit working on a book for a year, and it's the feedback. I got one letter from a woman who said, I told my cousin she had to read your book. And the cousin wrote me, and I felt if I had only written onto the daughters for her, she said, I'm 70 years old, and my whole life I always thought it was my fault. And she said, learning about what the culture and learning about these different things, I realized that it was not me. And that book gave her like such a new lease on life at 70. I cried when I got that letter.
Wow, that's something. That's amazing.
We want to hear from you, and write reviews. If you read the books, write reviews, please. It helps.